Ma'am, stop right there. This area is restricted. I need ID.
I'm authorized to meet here. Please step aside.
You don't look authorized. Stand against the wall now.
On what legal basis are you detaining me?
You're being suspicious. Put it on record. You are detaining the presiding judge of this courthouse.
The security scanner at the courthouse entrance emitted a dull electronic hum as people moved through in steady rhythm. Shoes echoed against polished marble floors. Morning light filtered through tall glass panels, cold and clinical. A black woman in a charcoal coat stepped forward, holding a leather briefcase, her pace calm, unhurried like someone who knew exactly where she was going. "Ma'am, stop right there." The voice cut through the ambient noise, sharp commanding. She turned slowly. The uniformed courthouse police officer stood with his hand raised, palm out, blocking her path. His eyes moved over her, not curious, not cautious, but dismissive. "I need to see your ID, now." Around them, people slowed. A clerk paused mid-step. A young attorney tightened his grip on a coffee cup. The woman did not raise her voice. She did not flinch. "Is there a problem, officer?" The officer exhaled through his nose. "You don't look like you're authorized to be beyond this point. This area is restricted, ID." His tone carried the weight of assumption, the kind that does not ask questions because it believes it already knows the answers. The woman glanced at the security sign behind him, then at the courtroom directory on the wall. Courtroom 4B, her courtroom. She shifted her briefcase from one hand to the other. "I'm late for a proceeding," she said. "If you'll excuse me." The officer stepped closer, closing the space between them. Sirens from the street outside briefly echoed through the glass doors. "You're not going anywhere until you show me identification." "Don't make this difficult." The air felt heavier. Phones appeared in hands subtle at first, then openly raised. Someone whispered, "What's going on?" Someone else shook their head. She reached into her coat slowly, deliberately, not for a wallet, but to steady herself. Her voice remained level. "On what basis are you detaining me?" The officer's jaw tightened. "You're being suspicious. That's enough." "Suspicious of what exactly?" Walking into a courthouse, a silence followed. Not empty, but tense. The kind that stretches time. The officer did not answer. He gestured toward the wall. "Stand over there. Now." As she complied, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the irony pressed in. The building was designed to represent justice, balance, neutrality. Columns towering above them, like promises carved in stone. And yet here she was treated like an intruder, in the very place where she decided the fate of others. Her eyes drifted to the courtroom doors down the hall. Inside, a bailiff was probably arranging files. Attorneys were checking notes. A case was about to begin, presided over by a judge who at this very moment was being stopped and questioned like she did not belong. The officer finally spoke again, louder now for the crowd. "Last chance. ID, or I escort you out." She looked him directly in the eye. Calm. Unblinking. "Officer," she said, every word measured, "you are about to make a very serious mistake." Years before that morning at the courthouse, the woman now standing against the marble wall had learned how silence could be louder than insults. She grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a narrow brick apartment above a laundromat that never quite lost the smell of detergent and hot metal. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse. Her father drove city buses until his back gave out. Books were not decoration in their home. They were escape routes. She studied at the kitchen table while sirens wailed outside. Constitutional law textbooks lay open beside handwritten flashcards. She learned early that excellence was not optional. It was armor. In college, she was the only black woman in several of her classes. Professors confused her with other students. Classmates assumed she was there on scholarship, never on merit. She responded by finishing first in her class. Law school was worse. Internships went to students whose parents already knew judges. Clerkships were whispered about in hallways she was never invited into. She stayed late at the library reading until the security guards recognized her by name. When she finally stood in a courtroom as a junior attorney, older lawyers spoke over her addressed questions to her male colleagues, assumed she was support staff. She kept her voice steady and her arguments precise. Years later, she would be known for that steadiness. As a judge, she built a reputation that unsettled people who expected deference. She asked questions others avoided. She ruled against police departments when evidence showed abuse of power. She wrote opinions that cited precedent with surgical clarity. She had removed officers from the street with a signature and a gavel. She had done it without raising her voice. By the time she became the presiding judge of that courthouse, she had earned every inch of authority the robe represented. But the robe was not on her shoulders that morning. She had chosen a simple coat, a briefcase instead of a clerk. She believed in moving through the world as herself, not as a symbol. The man standing in front of her had walked a very different path. He grew up in a small town where his father wore a uniform and his authority went unquestioned. Rules were simple there: obey or be corrected. He joined the military straight out of high school. Structure suited him. Orders made sense. After his discharge, law enforcement felt like a natural continuation. Same hierarchy, same sense of control. At the police academy, instructors praised his confidence. His reports were clean, his posture sharp. But there were comments in his evaluations. Tends to escalate, struggles with discretion, needs improvement in community interactions. None of them stopped his advancement. He transferred to courthouse security after an incident on patrol that ended quietly internally, without paperwork reaching the public. In his first year at the courthouse, he learned patterns: who belonged where, who walked with purpose, who avoided eye contact. He developed shortcuts in his thinking. Attorneys wore certain suits. Judges arrived with entourages. Defendants came with uncertainty written on their faces. Anyone who did not fit the pattern triggered something in him: a need to assert control before it was challenged. Complaints had been filed. A clerk once said he spoke down to her. A public defender reported being stopped repeatedly while her white colleagues were waved through. Each time, supervisors described it as a misunderstanding, a matter of tone. Nothing provable, nothing worth documenting further. That morning, when he saw the woman walking toward the secured hallway, his mind did not search for credentials. It searched for justification. She did not look like his idea of authority. She did not arrive how he expected power to arrive. So his body reacted before his judgment could catch up. Back at the wall, the woman stood still, aware of eyes on her back. She thought about the cases waiting in her courtroom. A motion hearing involving alleged excessive force. A young defendant whose future depended on whether evidence would be suppressed. The irony was sharp enough to taste. The officer glanced toward the small crowd that had gathered. His chest tightened. This was no longer a simple stop. It was a performance now. To back down would be to admit error. To admit error would be to lose face. His training had taught him to control situations, not reconsider them. She watched him recalibrate, recognize the signs. She had seen them from the bench countless times. The subtle shift when an authority figure realizes they might be wrong, but cannot afford to show it. The moment when ego replaces judgment. In that space between them, two histories collided. One built on proving she belonged in rooms never meant for her. The other built on assuming certain people did not. Neither of them spoke, but the story between them was already complete. The question was not whether the truth would come out. It was how much damage would be done before it did. The hallway outside the secured courtrooms was no longer just a passageway. It had become a stage. People slowed as they passed, pretending to check their phones, pretending to read notices posted on the wall. No one wanted to stare. Everyone did. The woman adjusted her stance, keeping her hands visible, her posture relaxed. She had learned long ago that any sudden movement could be misread. "Officer," she said quietly, "I am authorized to be here. I can show you my courthouse credentials." She opened her briefcase, just enough to reveal a slim leather folder. The officer did not look. He shook his head before she could even lift it. "That's not what I asked for. I said government-issued ID." A court clerk stepped closer, hesitation written across her face. She recognized the woman. Everyone on this floor did. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The officer's body was angled outward now, not just toward the woman, but toward the growing audience. His voice carried farther. "You don't get special treatment here. Rules apply to everyone." Someone near the elevators whispered, "Isn't that the judge?" Another voice responded, "I think so." A phone camera clicked to life, not hidden at all now. The red recording light reflected faintly off the marble walls. The woman met the officer's eyes. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking you to follow proper procedure." She reached into the folder and held up a courthouse access card, her name partially visible, the seal unmistakable. The officer glanced at it for less than a second. Not enough to read. Not enough to reconsider. "That doesn't prove anything. Step back." A public defender finally spoke, his voice edged with disbelief. "Officer, she's supposed to be in courtroom 4B. We're waiting on her." The officer turned sharply. "This does not concern you. Step away." The crowd grew tighter, not physically closer, but more present. Shoulders angled inward, eyes locked. The energy shifted from curiosity to discomfort. This was no longer routine security. This was something else, something wrong, and everyone could feel it. Inside the officer's chest, the pressure built. He could feel control slipping, not from the woman, but from the room. Too many witnesses, too many questions. His authority depended on momentum, and momentum required escalation. He took a step closer to her, lowering his voice. "You're being uncooperative. That's suspicious behavior in a secure government building." She nodded slowly, as if acknowledging a familiar argument. "Asserting my rights is not suspicious. Detaining someone without cause is." That was the moment. The invisible line crossed. His jaw tightened. His hand moved slightly toward his radio. "I'm going to need you to remain here until we sort this out." "Remain here for how long?" "Until I say otherwise." Down the hall, a bailiff glanced at his watch. Court was supposed to start in 3 minutes. A clerk whispered into a phone, her back turned. Someone else muttered, "This is about to get ugly." The woman exhaled, once controlled, deliberate. She looked around, not for help, but to mark faces, witnesses' angles. She had done this before from the other side. "Officer," she said clear and steady, "I am going to comply with your instructions, but I want it noted that I am being detained without reasonable suspicion." The officer nodded sharply, mistaking compliance for victory. "Good. Stand right there." She stepped back against the wall, the cool stone pressing through her coat. The irony settled heavy in her chest. The law was written to protect against exactly this, and yet here it was unfolding in real time, in a building dedicated to justice under the watchful eyes of those who believed in it. The officer scanned the hallway, aware now that retreat was no longer an option. If he backed down, it would be on camera. If he doubled down, it would be worse. His training had not prepared him for this moment. Only his ego guided him now. And as the courthouse clock ticked forward, the consequences of that choice moved closer with every second. The officer's radio crackled once, then fell silent. He did not use it. Not yet. He took a breath, slow but shallow, as if steadying himself for something he had already decided to do. "You're coming with me," he said. "We need to verify your identity." "Verify where?" "Security office." The words landed heavy. A few people in the hallway exchanged looks. This was no longer a brief delay. This was removal. The officer gestured down the corridor, his body turning before she had fully responded, assuming compliance as entitlement. She walked beside him, not because she accepted his authority, but because she understood the danger of resisting it. Each step echoed louder than the last. Click, click, click. The sound of her heels against stone stretched unnaturally, as if the hallway itself were holding its breath. They passed courtroom doors, oak wood, brass numbers. Behind one of them, attorneys sat ready, unaware that the person who would decide their arguments was being escorted like a suspect 10 yards away. A bailiff caught sight of her and froze. Their eyes met for half a second. Recognition, confusion, alarm. He started forward, then stopped uncertain, trapped by protocol and disbelief. The officer's hand hovered near his duty belt. Not touching, close enough to threaten. Keep moving. The crowd followed at a distance, pulled by instinct and discomfort. Someone whispered, "This isn't right." Another murmured, "She didn't do anything." Phones stayed raised. No one stopped recording. Inside her chest, the judge counted. Not seconds, breaths. She cataloged everything. Time, location, witnesses. The exact phrasing he had used. Detained, suspicious. Verify identity. She had written opinions on cases that began exactly like this. She knew how they ended. They reached the security office door. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The officer stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "Hands where I can see them." She raised them slowly, palms open. The movement felt surreal. Slow motion. The world narrowing to the hum of electricity. The faint smell of cleaning solution. The tightness in her wrists that had not yet come. "Officer," she said, her voice still steady. "You are escalating a situation without cause." He ignored her. "Step inside." She crossed the threshold. The door closed behind them with a muted thud that sounded final. Outside the hallway, noise dulled, replaced by a hollow quiet. Inside the small room, a metal desk, 2 chairs, a security monitor flickering with camera feeds. The officer stood between her and the exit. He finally reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need a supervisor. Possible unauthorized individual beyond restricted area." Unauthorized. The words settled like dust. She lowered her hands but did not sit. "For the record," she said, "I am being detained. I have not been informed of any crime." The officer did not respond. His eyes flicked to the door, then to the monitor, then back to her. For the first time, uncertainty cracked through his posture. Not enough to stop. Enough to hesitate. Outside the room, voices gathered, muffled, urgent. A clerk, a bailiff, someone higher up. The consequences were arriving faster, now pressing in from the edges. Inside, the injustice had already occurred, not because of handcuffs or force, but because the system had failed at its most basic promise. That authority would be checked, that assumptions would not outweigh facts, that justice would not depend on appearance. She stood there calm in the center of it, knowing that whatever happened next would not stay contained within these walls. The door to the security office opened without a knock. It was not forced. It was not rushed. It was deliberate. A man in a dark suit stepped inside, followed by a woman carrying a tablet pressed tightly to her chest. Their expressions were not angry. They were alarmed. "What is going on here?" The voice was calm, controlled, and carried weight. The officer turned sharply. "Sir, this individual was found beyond a restricted area and refused to provide proper identification. I'm in the process of verifying her status." The man's eyes shifted past the officer and landed on the woman standing near the desk. For half a second, his face emptied of expression. Then color drained from it entirely. "Judge." The room seemed to contract. The woman inclined her head slightly. "Good morning." The tablet slipped in the other woman's hands, caught just before it hit the floor. Her mouth opened, then closed. She did not speak. She did not need to. The officer frowned. "Judge who?" He turned halfway, confusion etched across his face. "Presiding Judge Eleanor Marshall." The man said, his voice now tight. "Courtroom 4B. The morning docket has been waiting for 8 minutes." Silence crashed down, heavy, absolute. The officer's posture changed instantly. Shoulders stiffened. His hand dropped from his radio. His breathing grew shallow, audible in the small room. "That's not possible," he said. "She didn't identify herself." The judge looked at him steadily. "I attempted to." The man in the suit stepped forward, positioning himself subtly between them. He glanced at the monitor, at the report screen still open. "Unauthorized individual." He swallowed. "Officer," he said quietly, "you are detaining the presiding judge of this courthouse." The officer's face flushed, then paled. His jaw worked as if searching for words that refused to come. "I was just following procedure." Procedure does not include removing a judge from the courtroom hallway without cause, the man replied. His tone was even. The damage already done. The woman with the tablet finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Her credentials were logged this morning, same as every other day. The officer's eyes darted to the judge, really looked at her for the first time. Not as a silhouette, not as an assumption. As a person whose authority had never required his approval. "I didn't know," he said. The words fell flat. Judge Marshall stepped forward, closing the distance herself now. Her voice was quiet, but it filled the room. "Not knowing is not the same as not being responsible. Outside the office, the hallway buzzed with contained chaos. Court staff murmured. Phones vibrated with messages spreading faster than footsteps. Someone whispered, "He detained her." Someone else answered the judge. The man in the suit cleared his throat. "Judge, we are prepared to escort you to the courtroom immediately." She nodded once. Then she turned back to the officer. "Everything that happened here today will be documented. Every word, every decision." The officer stood frozen, staring at the floor, at the badge on his chest, at the reality he could no longer outrun. In the space of a few minutes, the power dynamic had inverted completely. Not by force, by truth. The door opened again. Light from the hallway flooded in. Witnesses saw her emerge, composed, dignified, followed by administrators moving too quickly, speaking too softly. The officer remained behind, alone in the security office, surrounded by screens that had captured everything. For the first time that morning, he understood the full weight of the mistake he had made, and it was crushing. The courtroom doors opened late that morning. Not by much. 5 minutes. Enough for whispers to spread faster than procedure ever could. When Judge Marshall took her seat, the room rose instinctively. The gavel struck once, clean, controlled. The docket moved forward as if nothing had happened. But everything had. By lunchtime, the first video surfaced. A shaky clip from the hallway. No sound, just images. The officer blocking her path. Her standing still. Phones raised. By mid-afternoon, a second angle appeared. Clearer, longer. This one captured the escort down the corridor. The removal, the door closing. By evening, the footage was everywhere. View counts climbed in real time. Hundreds of thousands. Then millions. Comment sections filled with the same sentence repeated in different words. This could have been anyone. This happens every day. Even judges are not safe. The courthouse released a brief statement. An incident occurred involving a misunderstanding. That language did not survive the night. Legal analysts began breaking down the video frame by frame. Former prosecutors pointed out the lack of reasonable suspicion. Civil rights attorneys cited case law. Retired judges shook their heads and used words like indefensible. Judge Marshall did not give interviews. She did not need to. She let documents speak. The complaint was filed within days. Detailed. Precise. Every moment time-stamped. Every witness listed. Claims included unlawful detention, violation of equal protection, abuse of authority, and failure to follow established security protocols. The officer was named individually. So was the Courthouse Security Division. The response was immediate. The officer was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. His access badge deactivated. His weapon secured. Internal Affairs pulled prior complaints. Patterns emerged quickly. Stops that went nowhere. Warnings that went undocumented. Supervisors who described him as firm but fair, without ever defining fair. As the investigation widened, more voices came forward. A public defender who had been stopped 3 times in the same hallway. A clerk who said he spoke to her like she was trespassing in her own workplace. None of it had seemed urgent enough before. Now, it was impossible to ignore. The city attorney reviewed the case, then reviewed it again. The footage alone was enough. The location made it worse. A courthouse. A judge. The symbolism was devastating. Settlement talks began quietly. They did not stay quiet. Numbers leaked, larger than expected. The city knew this was not just about one officer. It was about precedent, about what happens when authority goes unchecked in a building designed to restrain it. The officer resigned before termination paperwork could be finalized. His union did not fight it. They had seen the video. They knew when not to argue. The settlement was approved weeks later. Funds allocated not only to damages, but to mandatory retraining, revised security protocols, and independent oversight of courthouse policing. The officer's name would follow him. In databases, in reports, in any future application that asked the wrong question. Judge Marshall returned to the bench the next day after the agreement was signed. Same calm, same steady voice, but something had shifted. In the courthouse, in the public, in the quiet understanding that power once exposed could be corrected. Justice had not been loud, it had been thorough. What happened inside that courthouse was not a misunderstanding. It was a textbook example of how authority, when mixed with unchecked bias, produces unlawful outcomes. In a government building, especially a courthouse, detentions are governed by strict constitutional limits. An officer cannot stop, detain, or remove an individual without reasonable and articulable suspicion of a specific crime. Walking through a public hallway, even a secured one, is not a crime. Appearance is not a crime. Confidence is not a crime. Under the Fourth Amendment, a seizure occurs the moment a reasonable person believes they are not free to leave. The moment the officer blocked her path and demanded identification, that threshold was crossed. From that point on, the officer needed legal justification. He did not have it. No report of trespass, no alert, no observed violation. The detention was unlawful from its inception. Equal protection principles compound the violation. When enforcement decisions are driven by who someone appears to be, rather than what they are doing, the law is no longer neutral. Racial bias does not need to be spoken to exist. Courts evaluate actions, patterns, and outcomes. In this case, the outcome was clear. A black woman was treated as unauthorized in a place where she held the highest authority. Psychologically, this incident reflects a well-documented phenomenon known as authority bias paired with implicit racial bias. Authority bias causes individuals to overvalue their own power and discount contrary information. Implicit bias fills in gaps with stereotypes when quick judgments are made. Together, they create a dangerous shortcut, one where correction feels like a threat rather than a safeguard. For the public, there are practical lessons here. If you are stopped, remain calm. Ask clearly whether you are being detained and on what basis. If lawful in your jurisdiction, document the interaction. Do not argue emotionally. Facts matter. Words matter. Witnesses matter. And if you believe your rights have been violated, consult legal counsel as soon as possible. For institutions, the lesson is unavoidable. Training without accountability is theater. Complaints without follow-up are warnings ignored. Systems must track patterns, not just incidents. Oversight must be independent. not internal. And consequences must be real. And for anyone watching this unfold online, there is a final truth that cannot be ignored. If this could happen to the presiding judge of a courthouse, it can happen to anyone. Justice is not self-executing. It depends on vigilance. It depends on courage. And sometimes, it depends on the very people subjected to injustice, insisting that the system live up to its own promises.